there. I hope that you have a wonderful lunch and that you are ready for a very nice discussion this afternoon focusing on resilience. I'm Elmarie Slabbert. I'm the Research Director for the Research Unit Trees at Northwest University, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be here this afternoon to lead this specific discussion. And I think, colleagues, one of the words that I've picked up this morning is we are in a process of constant change. We need to change the way that we think to make the tourism sector better. We need to improve on that. And I think one thing that we realize is that the tourism industry has been a that we were during COVID. And that's why resilience is so important. It is critical for us to be proactive in how we think about this tourism sector, how we make plans for the tourism sector. And from all the numbers that we heard this morning, I think we also realized that the tourism sector has recovered, but we're not 100% there yet. We actually want to improve what we currently have. We want to grow this industry, and we need to pull our efforts in order to do that. So the question for this afternoon is, how do we then build resilience in this ever-changing tourism landscape? And this specific conference gives us a platform to discuss this, to create new ideas, and as I said, to think proactively in how we can do this and what should be done. And maybe also then give a few plans to TBCSA in order to move forward in terms of resilience. I am joined this afternoon by a very esteemed panel that will discuss this specific topic. The first person on the list is Winile Mntungwa, the Deputy Head at Durban Tourism, and you are welcome to come to the front and take a seat here. She's looking after Durban Tourism. Then we have Mr. Aaron Munetsi, the CEO of the Airlines Association of Southern Africa, with a more regional view. Let's welcome him to the stage. We have Monika Iuel, the Chief Tourism Officer of WESGRO. Let's also give her a hand, ladies and gentlemen. And then last not least, we have Pam Yako, the Chairperson of SanParks. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon, what they call the graveyard session, but this is not going to be a graveyard session, because we're talking about resilience. It's actually a future view of what we should do and what we can do to build this industry. We're going to pose a few questions. You're welcome to answer and to respond to these questions, and then when we have time at the end of the session, we can also ask the audience whether they have any questions or maybe ideas around resilience. One of the speakers this morning mentioned again the importance of public-private partnerships, and it is a critical aspect for the tourism sector. So if we look at that idea, what should the public and private sector do to ensure that there is resilience? Because this remains a challenge for us. Colleagues, any fresh ideas on this specific topic? Pam, maybe we can start with you. You are looking me in the eyes. Yes.
Thank you very much. Don't know about fresh, but I've got some ideas. Having worked in government before, that, we can never overemphasize the need to work together, right? And not only for the sake of it, just because it's what's required to move us forward. And it's not, the one thing that we probably suffer from over the years, whether you're going back into business trust days or you're going to PPGI now, we kind of like have stop, start. So we need an understanding that there's a need to work together. That's the first point. Secondly, and because resilience is about bouncing back, right? And so you can't bounce back if you don't have the historical lessons. And if we're going to keep on changing the narrative and the platform every time something happens and not learn from previous encounters, then we lose that institutional memory that's required. And my last point on this is on planning. I'll leave others to add, both in terms of scenarios that we plan for. If you look at the tourism industry, we can talk about scenarios from a rival's point of view of the growth of the sector in that way. Or if you look, or you could do something like they've done in terms of scenarios from a climate perspective, where you look at the various paths that you could take towards net zero, for example. And that scenario planning requires us to think ahead of what is and start to find strategies to take us there. And if that is not done in a way that ensures that the sustainability principles built into it, it's not going to take us anywhere. Let me leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Pam. Working together is one of the key focus areas. I think that's also a challenge, is to get the two sectors to work together. Monika?
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. So I work at WESGRO, and WESGRO was spoken about a little bit earlier around the air access project and others. So I think that I won't say we've perfected it, but I think we at WESGRO do know how to partner with private sector quite effectively behind a shared goal. I share Pam's view around sustainability. I think that that's a massive, massive focus area, and it has to be a focus area for us. We don't have to experience the same experiences that the global north is going through. We can leapfrog the experiences of a Barcelona or the experiences of a over-touristed destination. We can learn from them, but we have to make those decisions now. And those decisions are actually policy-led by government, so government needs to be bold and brave enough to say, what does tourism look like? What is the carrying capacity of a destination? And then private sector needs to come in with a supportive environmental practices that we were talking about earlier, hiring locally, bringing the community along. So sustainability is a really, really important one. And then just as a sort of opening salvo, the second thing that I would like to talk about is actually, and Roger Foster, I don't know if he's still in the room, I assume not, he sort of sparked this for me earlier. There's actually a concept called anti-fragility, which is almost the opposite of resilience, which actually contains the theory that some things need to be disrupted and need to go through a damaging time in order to become better and stronger. Think the fires that help the fynbos grow and bud in the Western Cape, for example. And so Airlink for me is a classic example of not resilience, but anti-fragility, that have really utilized a crisis and sort of made themselves better through it. And I think for me, almost, it's more useful as an industry to contemplate not how do we manage to shelter in place and survive a shock, but how do we plan to fail forward, to really actually use something to galvanize the industry and galvanize the destination.
Thank you so much. I agree 100%. Aaron, anything from your side?
Yes, the first question I have is, where is the Deputy Minister? She should be very proud of this panel. Prof, I think we need maybe to step back a little bit and ask us the question, what is resilience? I think we must move away from rhetoric and just accept that everybody is talking about resilience, so we have to talk about it. We have to actually get to a stage ourselves as an industry to have an agreement of how we define resilience. And by so doing, it reminds me, Prof, of a saying that it's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from somebody else's mistake. So we need to actually unpack it and say, what do we want to achieve? Is it 15.6 million visitors by 2030? Who else has been able to achieve that kind of success, and how have they done it, where have they failed, and then we bring it back home to today's conversation, where we then say, now that we have agreed on what resilience is, then we build around it. And for me, I think it's three important elements. The first one is that we have to talk about putting together systems in place. It should not be individually based. To the extent that we have seen in other environments where, because everything was based on one person, if there's a change of government or there's a change of leadership, the moment that person or that leadership moves, everything crumbles. We need to be ourselves able to build a system that is not dependent on individuals or on personalities. It must be built on how we want to achieve what we want to achieve. So the first thing for me is build systems. The second one is accountability. And I think without accountability, resilience is non-existent, because you have to be accountable for a specific outcome. In order for you to achieve that outcome, there are certain things that you need to do. And the third one, Prof, is also about the environmental scan that you need to continuously do, because the environment that you are working within does not remain static. I think earlier on it was mentioned, I think it was Roger who said, part of the regulations that we're using were designed in the 60s or even in the 80s. Things have changed so much that we are still using the same kind of environment that we planned around way back then, and yet we are not even talking about the things that are actually prevalent right now. And then, going forward with an environmental scan, we got to be able to say, even when we have got these systems in place, what safeguards or guardrails do we put in place to be able to safeguard the systems so that they become adaptive and adaptive to the circumstances as they change going forward?
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's exactly where the private and the public sector needs to work together, to rethink what we have, and are we actually following the right strategies for this time that we are in. I started off by saying we are in a process of constant change, and I think, colleagues, that's not going to change. I think this is how it will be moving forward. So we will forever need to think creative in terms of our strategies and making changes as we move along. Winile, from your side, any ideas?
Thank you very much. The interesting thing about Durban is that one is talking from a reality point of view, considering what most of us would be aware of in terms of the crises and disasters that Durban has been through. Some were common to all of us, but there were ones that were unique to Durban in various aspects. So one thing in relation to your question, what it taught us as a collective, the different stakeholders, is that together we can actually stand and achieve more. Because if we're divided in terms of saying, no, we are government, we are private sector, there is very little we're going to achieve. So, and also the tenacity, which really is the resilient attitude and spirit, we really achieved a lot. I mean, we're coming from a blueprint where, while tourism is government-led, but it's private sector-driven and community-based. So all these stakeholders, they are a critical part of the collaboration, because if government and private sector drives tourism, but the community is not understanding the tourism, is not protecting the tourism, then we have a problem, because some of these disasters are actually caused by some irresponsible, attitudes and behaviors that are happening in the community. So it could be maybe to say, if there's socioeconomic challenges, then there's high crime, etc. Now, the community needs to be educated in terms of what it would do to better improve in terms of how the social elements, if they are challenges, they are better expressed rather than to damage infrastructure and any other thing that might then become a disaster kind of thing. So it's all about the collaboration, including resources, bringing resources together. Because if each party is doing their own thing in their corner, then we are spreading resources and we're not achieving a lot in terms of integrating these resources to achieve much more and a huge impact. And lastly, it's also important for the brand, because if each individual is going to be working in silos and not speaking in one voice, then it's a challenge, in terms of driving tourism and growing tourism, because it's all about the brand identity while we are diverse in our own aspects.
Thank you. And you really had experience in terms of pulling the public sector and private sector through a few crises there in KwaZulu-Natal as well.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you 100%. I think one of the things about the tourism industry is that dependence on other sectors and other industries. And obviously that influences our resilience and how we move forward. So if we talk about an energy crisis and we talk about a water crisis, it's directly influencing our sector. So what do you think should the role of tourism be in solving these challenges so that we can become more resilient? Anyone? Pam, let's start with you.
Let me go back to a point about, for me, it's probably linked to your first question, but I'll move on to your second question. And that is the need to work together. I'm reminded here about, let's just take the water crisis. What's happening now in the Vaal system? In my other life, I used to run the Department of Water. And in 2008, we knew already, based on the studies done by the engineers and the scientists at the department, that from 2013, unless Lesotho Highlands Phase 2 kicks in very soon, we will have issues of water security. So that information was known to the department. And one thing is that we had the planning capability and the forecasting capability, and even the modeling capability. But was that shared? No, right? Because now if you're running a business or a tourism business in Gauteng, for example, and you know that there's going to be predicted a water crisis at some point, you would plan differently. You would invest differently. So it's that data that's sitting in the public sector sometimes, or sometimes in the private sector, that is not shared in a way that makes either one of those to make the right investment decisions. And so for me, data and understanding what's happening around the industry, and to your point, although those might appear to be external to the industry, but they are actually, we feel the impact, all right, when something happens. So when there's a drought, we all feel it, right? And we've now forgotten, for example, and I take nothing away from this establishment, and please, I'm not attacking anybody. You just go to the bathrooms. I went to the ladies' ones. The statistician general can go to the former to the other one. And then you wash your hands, you open the tap, you wash your hands, and then it runs.
Yes.
For a good, I don't know for how long. Didn't time it. And cast your mind back to when we had the Cape Town crisis. And we would you get to the airport, even the pressure on the taps was regulated. There were even cleansers there for people to use without using the water. We are a water scarce country. So we've now forgotten our past, all right? And what could happen. And when it happens again, we'll be shocked.
Yeah.
And yet our practices have not changed. So I think the point that I'm really trying to drive home is data learning from our experiences, and start to look at what's happening in other sectors in order to improve what we do. And this is not just for the sake of it. Our future depends on it. Let me leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I can come in. So 100% lived through that horrible hashtag day zero in Cape Town, and memories are short, unfortunately. I want to speak a little bit about diversification, which I think is a massive strategy when contemplating resilience. Because oftentimes, and we experienced it in the pandemic, and again, speaking of short memories, it seems that the industry's had a very short-lived love affair with the domestic tourism market. And we at WESGRO have always said, we understand that when things return back to normal post the travel bans, businesses must demand a fair price for their product or for their experience, but you should always have a strategy for the domestic market. And I am sad to say that certainly on the face of it, that's not happening any longer. Certainly not in the products that I can see in my province. And domestic is just, it's the lifeblood of everything, and we need to really create some strategies both on the public sector side as well as on the private sector side to grow the culture of travel within our own population, which I think is going to save us through the next whatever it might be that happens next. And also then the continent, we were speaking a little bit about it when we were talking about airlift before lunch. But the rest of the continent is substantially more resilient as a tourist than your scaredy cat Australian that doesn't want to go anywhere when it looks even slightly unsafe. And so, you know, that's a massive market for us. They're our people, you know, it's the, ooh, we just changed colors. And that is a market that I think is largely not understood by the industry in South Africa, and how we reach it and how we cater for it, and what it is that they're actually looking for. And so I think remembering who our friends were when times were tough, I think is one of the key ways to learn how to be stronger together when the times are tough again.
Thank you so much. I think we underestimate the value still of the domestic market, and it is and the regional market even more. So it is something that we need to focus on, definitely. Any other ideas?
So, Prof, I'm just thinking, when I was watching the statistician, no, let's just call him StatGen, right? It's easier that way. Statistician stumbles. When I was watching his presentation, I kept thinking to myself, maybe what we should do is understand where we are as being in Southern Africa. So if we do away with the innocuous issue of borders, suddenly we're a market of 320 million people. Suddenly, just by doing away with the borders. And when we talk about domestic market, yes, we have a domestic market of 57 or so million people, but suddenly when we open the borders, we are now a domestic market of 300 million people. Why I thought about that is because there was an example in East Africa where when mobile phones were introduced, the cross-border mobile phone charges were horrendously high. So the mobile operators came together and said, listen, why don't we just charge the domestic rates as long as you are within the East Africa region? Prof, within a short space of time, the rates came down by almost 80%.
Sure.
But the traffic grew by almost 3,000% because they had created a domestic market out of the region. So I'm just thinking as we are talking here, I think because we need to give feedback when we come back to our program director. She says we must give feedback, right? So I think one of the suggestions that we need to make is let's start thinking of how resilient we can be without necessarily taking away the sovereignty of other states, but just creating a domestic market of the regional economic community. And that then goes to what Monika said earlier on, that we should not be susceptible to the whims of those people who are so far away that when they hear that there is a pandemic or there is Mpox or something, they start saying you can't go there. Guys, we are already resilient. We have dealt with Ebola. Do you know how dangerous and lethal Ebola is? But we eat Ebola for breakfast. So I think we should actually inculcate those lessons and actually put them in what Pam was speaking about earlier on. We have learned a lot of lessons, but we don't even have a custodian of those lessons to start with. Yep. So I think when we start embracing things like digitalization, it gives us an opportunity to quickly go back and say, we already have spoken about this, we have already dealt about it. Now that we think we're going to have a challenge, what are we going to do to just immediately kickstart the process of moving on ahead? I think that's where we start building resilience. The more we continue talking about how dangerous things can be and how things can get worse, we are actually moving away from resilience.
Thank you. Very interesting perspective on that. Shortly.
Yes. No, thank you. I think any crisis is really an opportunity for change because we are evolving. The behavior of the visitor now is totally different from how it was previously. And I think with COVID, as we always, frequently refer to, it gave us a character of the new normal, which then means the way of doing things, innovation, as within the tourism sector. If there were certain ways of doing business in as far as the product offering and the experience, it's all about innovation and focusing how the future is going to be in relation to the sector and adapt as such in terms of the products, repurposing products, and also adapting with the technology, because we are actually driven by the 4IR and understand what the visitor would want. Coming back to data. Because one thing that is dangerous is just to be shooting in the air in terms of product development and product offering and destination promotion. The data of the end user, attitude and desire is very important to just then make sure that when these products are being, made ready and offered, they respond to what those consumers or travel end user will be looking for. So that element of adapting is very, very important, and the data element is very, very important. And also, just lastly, there's a critical, from a South African destination, we are a rainbow nation, we are diverse, we've got so many unique things that the international market is looking for, but also the domestic market, particularly because they are domestic, the population who really, the understanding of tourism had not been so much. It was all about, one, it's expensive, it's only for a certain few. So for us, in terms of that resilience, because they are the first ambassadors of the destination, that awareness and education of that they must be the first, visitors within the destination, and an appropriate value proposition, because there's also disasters like economic crisis where there would be a recession. Then what does it mean? People don't see tourism as a viable spend because there is not enough disposable income. So then it's about adapting as well to make sure that it reaches the affordability levels of that kind of market we are looking for as the tourism industry.
Thank you so much. Focusing on technology. And also, taking into account the challenges that we have in terms of technology throughout South Africa. What do you think, and we've talked about digitization this morning as well, to what extent can that actually contribute then to resilience? Are we ready, to digitize and to use the technology to improve resilience? Because we want African solutions for Africa. What's your opinion on that?
Prof, I think we are ready. If you just look at a very, shallow deep dive, we have on the continent the youngest population in the world. Up to 65% of Africans are under the age of 35. How many people in this room are under the age of 35?
Unfortunately, not anymore.
And when you take that, Prof, when you take that, that data point, you begin to realize that we actually have much more going with us because these young people are very tech savvy. It is said that there are more cell phones in Africa than toothbrushes. Yeah, there are more cell phones than toothbrushes because most people have 2 or 3 cell phones and only 1 toothbrush. And because of that, our internet penetration is very, very high. So in terms of adaptation of technology, our adaptation rate is very high compared to any other continent. And when you bring it back home, we are actually way ahead of everybody else because of our industrial development and so forth. So I think we are already sitting on a gold mine in terms of the ease of adaptation of technology. All we have to do is put the plan in place, not only for ourselves as tourism, but with everybody else. And this is where I think, Prof, we also need to introspect as tourism and say, when we talk about the Tourism Leadership Conference, which other sectors are we bringing into the room for them to be able to have the same conversation with us? Because if we live here and we ask the miners if they know what our pain points are, they probably don't know. And we can't blame them because we haven't invited them. And yet we blame them for all the other ills that they bring into the communities. I think we need to take that technology aspect first and then say, let's open it up to other sectors that are also using technology. Then suddenly we all have a very huge database of technology that we can use for the betterment of our industry.
Great, thank you so much. Monika?
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit from the perspective of the DMO. One of the real sort of highlights, one of the real positive outcomes of going through the crisis that we went through is how digital marketing has just gone on steroids. And it's allowed even a DMO with a small budget like WESGRO's, it allows us to be very, very focused and very, very targeted in terms of how we run our big campaigns, both domestically and internationally, on a very small budget. And I would anticipate that for the private sector is probably the same, that your ability to market, your experience has become more affordable as technology has advanced. And I anticipate actually that this will in future even increase even further and be able to not only target a particular country, but actually find a particular interest group, a particular channel that is a particular interest group is on to really sort of target really specifically. I would like a 25 to 35-year-old traveler from Nigeria whose habits are this to see my content, so that you can start attracting really not only at market level but really at almost individual level the right people to come and visit your destination. So I'm anticipating that to become even more favorable and even more positive in the future. The thing that I think we struggle with domestically in this with our industry here, I don't think we have the right forecasting models yet. The thing I think that we really struggle with, obviously, nobody can forecast the next crisis. I mean, if someone could do that, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. But we can't even forecast real performance. We've got a couple of data points that could tell you a little bit of a story around who's booked a flight or who's searching for a flight in which from which market. But we don't really know, other than what you've already got on the books and a little bit of what the OAG guys or the Forward Keys guys are telling us about demand. We don't really have a sense of how things are going to go. And so that really removes your ability to be prepared, right? And I think that that's, for me, a big pain point at WESGRO, is we get asked all the time, how is it going to go? What's the season looking like? And we have no idea. We're still flying blind, really, ultimately. And that, for me, is like almost a pet project, is to try and find the right combination of data points to truly and honestly be able to say, this segment is going to go like this part of the year is going to go like this, here we need to go after a different market because the current markets aren't working. We don't have that ability at the moment, and that, for me, is on my wish list for Santa this Christmas.
Thank you.
No, I just want to add to that. You know, you're basically speaking about planning and using data at an industry level to make decisions on a daily basis. And We also know, though, and I agree 100% about the repository of that information, the use of that information, and the analysis and implications of that, and joint analysis. And I think it's a good this is a good platform to start looking at those things. I do want to make a point, though, about some of the global risks that we have. That are identified. We know the World Economic Forum would come up with the global risks, and we know that for the past 2 years, for example, environmentally related risks are at the top, right, or top 10, should I say, and yet we haven't thought about how do we respond. And then when those risks are identified and when they actually happen, those things as predicted, we will be surprised as if where is this coming from, all right? And it also, at the same time, I'm also realistic about people's budgets. And this is where the collaboration is important, because you can't really plan for what might or might not, depend, you have to really have big pockets to do this stuff. But where is that place where the forecasting happens, where the modeling happens for the industry, especially given those global risks that we know about, okay? And how do we, for example, you spoke about the fynbos earlier on. Coming from South African national parks, we had, in the last 2 years, 120 fires. And we don't have the capability to deal with that. We try and put out fires, but it affects the biodiversity that we look after, it affects our business operations, it affects us in many ways. But as yet, we still don't have the way forward in terms of how do we predict this, how do we respond to this. You can also talk about the summers getting longer. Are we as an industry adapting to that? And so what does it mean? Now, do we push our thing to go into March, April, because the summers are getting longer, or are we going to stick to what we call the tourist season, because that's what we've always known. So it's looking at those things and starting to adapt, and I like the concept of adapting. However, adapting for adaptation's sake is important. It's not, for me, it's not going to work. So we need to talk about, or think about at least, how do we respond to some of the environmental, or call it sustainability challenges that are going to come and hit us, not in the not so distant future. And what is our climate response as the industry? And how do we make sure that we put our efforts around that in a way that kind of protects us or helps us if it doesn't protect us, because we can't completely avoid it, all right? Or prepares us for a better response in the future. I think that's one of the things for me I think we need to think about. What is the tourism response to climate change as a concrete suggestion that I would like the TBCSA to think about?
Thank you. I think, the data are available, but it sounds like it's almost that gap between the data are there, the results are there, but what's happening in industry, and this is where the gap lies. And that's something that we need to address. You've got the data, but not necessarily knowing what to do with that and how to implement new strategies around that. Thank you so much. I think data analytics will become more and more important in the future. And you can have a lot of data, but if you don't know how to interpret that and how to use that in a proactive manner, it actually means nothing. So Monika, your comment in terms of which data points to use in order to make decisions, I think is very relevant in future, and really gather the data that we need to make informed decisions. And being a researcher, I listen very carefully to what you're saying now, and to see where we can actually fit in with that, because a lot of the research are there, and it showed us what's going to happen, but the reaction is too slow.
Yeah.
So I think that's also where a little bit of a gap lies. Colleagues, we've got a variety of beautiful attractions in South Africa, cultural and sport and all kinds of different attractions. Are we optimizing that in order to remain or to be more resilient, or do you think more can be done to build these attractions without moving into this sphere of over-tourism and all of those issues that's currently, globally going on? Monika?
So my big concern at the moment is that it seems, certainly from an international traveler behavior point of view, that the road trip is starting to die out. And I think it's the accessibility of air travel. I think we've perhaps been doing far too good a job in making sure that all the attractions, some of the main sort of attractions in South Africa are connected by airlift. So people can now just fly into the Sabi Sand, do their 2-3 nights at a lodge, and then fly to Cape Town, do that, and then go home, and never visit the Berks like potholes, and never see Pilgrim's Rest, and never drive from Joburg into the Lowveld, and never experience all the putstalls along the way. And that's a big worry for me. I fear it's going in the wrong direction. I don't think that our safety and security situation in the country is helping the situation, and I don't think that our crumbling road infrastructure is helping the matter either. To your point of earlier around how tourism is a team sport, I think that there's a couple of areas where, in order for us to be able to grow tourism into all of the communities again, you need to kind of make it relatively okay for a tourist to travel through those areas. So our big job at WESGRO, we have this jewel in the crown, which is Cape Town, which has got such a global brand now. It almost stands shoulder to shoulder with South Africa and the Kruger as this name that people just know. But of course, our job is to make sure that when people come to the province, they don't just visit Cape Town, they travel around and they spend as much time as possible exploring the rest of the province and spending a lot of time there. So I think that is a massively underutilized opportunity for South Africa to address and to counteract risks of over-tourism by making sure that you're developing iconic experiences and iconicity, in fact, of your region, rather than of just one place. I read an interesting statistic the other day that said 80% of tourism happens in 10% of the planet, which is scary to me, and I hope to God that we never get there as our country. But because if you're intentional about trying to spread people into the rest of the province and making the Weskus as cool as Bree Street, then you can start getting those guys to come and experience more of your province. The other area that I think is very important to that end is your repeat visitor. Because your repeat visitor will have ticked off some of the main things that everybody is told that they need to come and see in your destination. And then the next time they come, they will explore. They'll sort of say, okay, I went to the Oranjezicht market in Cape Town, maybe now let me do the Route 44 market in Stellenbosch, or let me try a different, so your repeat traveler, also your acquisition cost is almost zero on a repeat traveler. And so the repeater market and your sort of road tripper, those I think are opportunities for the destination to really build a resilient offering for years to come.
Thank you, Monika. Any other ideas, colleagues?
So, Prof, I think maybe we also need to go back and start another project of redefining some of the, can I say, tried and tested ways of doing tourism. So I'll give you an example. We talk about the Big Five, and the Big Five only talks about the animals, right? But maybe we as South Africans and as Africans need to have our own Big Five, which speaks to things like, for example, biodiversity. There's nowhere else in the world where you find the biodiversity that we have. Let's talk about our culture. Our culture is so diverse, it's out of this world. Nobody else has got our culture. Let's talk about our landscapes. Some of the world's biggest landscapes are just across the road, 2.5 hours from us in Namibia. Let's talk about the experiences. Did you know that one of the top 10 soccer derbies is here in South Africa? When Kaizer Chiefs plays Pirates? Yes. It's one of the big top 10 soccer derbies, and we don't even sell it to ourselves, let alone to people coming from outside the country. Let's talk about our cuisine. So if we talk about only those 5 elements, we have a completely different, exposure to who we are and what we can sell as our own 5. We don't have to rely only on the animals. Because if we say Big 5 is only about the animals, then we are doing exactly what you're talking about, channeling all our traffic into SanParks area, so they just have to go to SanParks, and that's it. And yet, right behind there, they can actually have a lot of other experiences that enhance a much bigger experience. And when you talk about repeat visits, they can come again and again and again and again. When we talk about data analytics, Prof, so I was in Ghana not so long ago, and I was actually quite interested to see how they have turned or flipped the script in terms of analyzing data. So they have a lot of African Americans that come through, they call it the year or the decade of return. And initially they just identified them as Americans. But they've now gone to another stage where they're saying, okay, you're Americans, but let's see where you actually identify with as where you originally came from. And they are now curating specific programs for those Americans who are of Yoruba extract, for example, and making sure when they come to Ghana, they give them citizenship or whatever, but they make sure that they channel them through to have an experience of their cultural extension. So I think even for us ourselves, when we say we are spending a lot of money targeting tourists from what we call source markets, there are a lot of Africans in the diaspora that have now naturalized. And when they travel with the American passport or Swedish passport, whatever, we record them as coming from the traditional source markets. But if we scrape a little bit, we will see that these guys are actually coming into South Africa for 2-3 days. Then they go to their original home countries, and then they come back. But if we now try and understand that particular element of how they are traveling, we can actually inculcate quite a lot of other things to extend their stay in our country. Simple things like you can go home and leave your girlfriend here because you don't want your parents to shout at you. Or you can go home and leave your elderly parents here because we've got better facilities for. So there are a lot of other things that we can do just by mining that data much more smartly.
Thank you. Winile?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'd just like to tap, before I come back to the gems, in terms of the technological aspect, my colleague here has he spoke about the cell phones. It's at your fingertips. Everybody, things are like here, fingertips. Earlier on, we saw the feedback from the CEO in terms of the impact that was done by the ad and how they have actually reached so many millions of people. It was through the technology. So for tourism, really, it's where we need to capitalize because that's the most efficient and futuristic way of communicating. Firstly, the current, we've got VRs, we've got 3Ds, etc., but also any futuristic development. Now we've got AI. Also, just want to tap into that because if there is a huge development that will be happening, like we're speaking about developments in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, like the Club Med Resort, while it's under construction, for appreciation of what it's going to look like, that AI comes into play and many other aspects so that future planning and awareness of the visitors we're trying to attract and target, they are aware of what is actually coming, not just hearing the definition of it, but there's that visual appreciation. Now coming to the gems or taking advantage of the diverse offerings of the destination. Earlier on I spoke about the diversity of South Africa, and coming from Durban, we are just a melting pot of culture. And one with the attractions that we have, which are also currently, just recently, also receiving World Heritage accolades. So those are the, attractions that, in terms of the uniqueness we need to capitalize on, because they are the value proposition at which to attract the visitors. There's also the uniqueness of you talk about Ushaka Marine, that biggest aquarium adventure, and the natural resources like the beaches that we have. It's not only about swimming, but it's also about the marine, the filming that actually can go in there, because you would have some documentaries by world or global media houses choosing to come to the destination. So those are the elements at which we could, expand in terms of capitalizing on to attract a different, diverse segment of the tourists and visitors.
I'm almost hearing a repackaging of what we have, because we actually have everything in South Africa, and we can offer amazing experiences to different types of tourists and different tourist groups. So maybe a rethinking of the image without losing what we had in terms of the tourism industry, but also showing all the not new offerings, but more authentic offerings maybe in South Africa. And we've got wonderful authentic experiences here in South Africa. So I agree. I think there's, within what we offer and what we have, we can still do a lot. Now, thinking ahead a little bit, although we don't have perfect forecasting models, but let's say if you can maybe give us 2 ideas, if, thinking ahead for the next, let's say 15 years, which is a long time, let's make it 10 years, but what would you focus on to maybe ensure that we are more resilient than we currently are? Just 2 ideas maybe from each of you. Anyone can go, Monika?
Okay. So I have 2, and we haven't spoken about the one area yet at all, except I think Velma earlier was speaking about the Paris experience for Airbnb and the Taylor Swift economic impact story. I think we are both nationally as well as in the province not harnessing the power of events sufficiently. I have the privilege of also leading the Convention Bureau team for Cape Town and the Western Cape. So I'm aware of the hard work that gets done in order to attract business events and conferences into the province, and there's this inflection point there. If you are targeting the right sectors to come to your place to have their meeting, you automatically benefit from the smart people that come to your place to do the thinking. And in fact, oftentimes you will then receive investment out of that particular sector into your destination. You will potentially drive exports if it's a different kind of a sector. And so I think there's this inflection point where we can, as a national as well as at a provincial level, say, our focus areas are digitalization and technology, sustainability, green, whatever it is. If you start attracting those sectoral meetings to your destination, you will benefit both as an industry as well as a country from those smart thinkers. And in addition, if you're more intentional about which events you're attracting at which time of year to which part of your place, you can actually smooth out your seasonality, you can drive your regional spread a bit more. So I don't think that we have, at a national level, or even at a provincial level, a really harmonized approach to events, because again, it's a team sport. It's ourselves in tourism as well as the guys from culture, art and sport. So, who gets to claim what? We call it sports tourism, but it's not our minister. So how does that all work together? So for me, for the next 15 years, if we could find a way to learn how to dance together in that space, I think that's a massive opportunity. And again, it's a nice way to bring the rest of Africa to come and see things that we share, our passion for music, our passion for sport, all of those sorts of things. So that's the first thing for me, is trying to unlock that somehow, collaboratively. Again, public and private sector need to play a role there. And then the second thing that I would like to focus on is the sustainability story. I really feel like, and it links a little bit to what Pam was saying about her experiences at the Department of Water, we know esoterically, theoretically, we know that the planet is not in a lack of space. I mean, living in the Western Cape, I can tell you the last year's storms and this year's storms are next level. I've never experienced anything like that. So I don't know that we can even still say it's theoretical. But I think that we need, as an industry and as a country, to respond to what is definitely coming. One of our unique selling points, to Aaron's point, is our biodiversity, our wide open spaces, our scenic beauty. That stuff's under threat. If we don't start making the right decisions now in terms of who comes, how we behave, how we protect the planet, and how we do our bit, it's going to become a problem. But sustainability is also a social aspect, right? So I don't think we're intentional enough yet to make sure that the tourism value chain benefits the community in which your tourism is taking place. I don't think that we bring our people along sufficiently. I don't think that there's deep enough understanding around the power of a tourist in your destination, and that stuff's going to trip us up. So for me, the two would be the power of events and the urgency around sustainability.
Thank you. Pam?
So I just want to add on to the sustainability issue. I think that I'm adding to what you've just said, because this is an area that I work in, so I'm very passionate about it. I mean, I think the one of the things that we're going to have to look at is also understanding our carbon footprint as an industry, okay? And I was told earlier on that there's been quite a few vulnerability assessments done. So we kind of like know where the areas are where we're much more vulnerable. The question is how do we respond to that now? But I'd also want to say that if you are in the climate change debates, there's something that we make reference to, and that is a just transition. Okay? So for me, it talks to your last point about, as we are talking about transformation and broadening access and getting more and more people to get involved and benefit from tourism, at the same time, if we're going to talk about being climate resilient, it's going to require some capital investment, right? And climate financing for the sector then becomes an issue, because who's going to fund it? And I mean, if I'm running a small outfit somewhere, my focus is going to try and get my tourists there. If you say I must now have a technology that is clean, and I must also do that, and I will not be able to do that. So part of the thing for me, what is the just transition equivalent for the tourism sector that we link back to our transformation agenda as a sector? And that would be my one thing, that if we get that right, I think we would make a big difference.
Thank you so much. Aaron, from your side?
Pam, I'm sorry, but I think I tend to be very controversial when it comes to this carbon footprint story. Yes, I understand that all of us on the globe, the planet, are responsible for this. But I think there are people who are more responsible, they might pay for it. We are not responsible for that.
Oh,
No. The other guys.
No, I'm not saying, if I may.
They must pay.
If I may. The fact that someone else that has got a bigger carbon footprint than we do does not mean that we shouldn't get our act together. That's not what I'm saying. That's why we're talking about in the climate negotiations, in the climate discussion, that you need to do this equitably. And it cannot be equal for everyone, because the footprint is not the same. And the impact on the environment is not the same. So therefore, we've got differentiated responsibilities. But having said that, we can't say, let's do nothing because our carbon footprint, let's not understand our carbon footprint. Let's not do anything about our energy transition. Or let's do nothing about cleaner technology. Let's not build the green economy just because our carbon footprint is not as big as the others. Because this is where I think we're going to have, if not, I think, competitive advantage into the future. If we open our eyes up to that discussion into the future. So that's my point. I'm not saying our carbon footprint is bigger than anyone else.
It actually becomes everyone's responsibility. Everyone's small footprint that if you can lessen that, it will make a difference at the end of the day. Yeah. Anything else, Aaron, to add?
Yeah. You know, there's nothing you can solve over a glass of red wine.
Yes.
So
all right.
We've got
a date. We've got a date.
So I think, Prof, as a takeaway, I think we need to come back to, again, the definitions that we use. And I think in South Africa, we really need to define what it is that we are going to be doing as an industry. Right now, we are operating in huge silos, massive silos. My colleague here says she doesn't have an idea of what the next season is going to be. And I'm sure in our midst, we have some airlines here. They will tell you that these guys have data that goes maybe even a year, if not more, ahead. And all they have to do is just come together, and they can get a sense of what the airlines are expecting in terms of their advanced bookings and so forth. So I think we need to break down those silos. And the second element is, I think we also need to have products that are specifically curated for our, for our domestic markets. Mm-hmm. Remember, I said we must break down the boundaries and have 300 million. So I'll give you an example. The culture that we have in South Africa is, if somebody visits me, either my brother or my sister coming with his or her family, I probably will ask them how long I'm going to be here. Across the borders, if you visit them, they actually vacate their bedroom for you to have use of their bedroom. So Airbnb will not have traction in those markets, and whereas in our markets they will have traction. I'm just trying to give an extreme example here of, I think what we need to do is just say, number one, when we talk about domestic tourism, when we are saying KZN is the playground of the country, can we not say KZN is the playground of the region, so that everybody then understands what it is that they're going to see in that playground? And the last thing is, the last contribution I have is, maybe we also need to extend the same offering that we're talking about to other industries, so that the guys in mining, the guys in agriculture understand what it is that we are selling on their behalf, including themselves. Because it's one thing for them to see the tourists driving up and down without knowing what we are proposing to those tourists as an attraction. Some tourists might actually want to go and see a sheep farm or a corn farm or whatever. But if we include everybody in the conversation, it becomes easier for us to actually extract what it is that we're selling.
Thank you so much. Last comments, Winile?
All right, thank you. Just the takeaway for me in relation to just the spirit of resilience is that history is important to be able to craft or curate the future. Now, and also in terms of the data and the analysis thereof, but also the scenario planning, because the future right now might not be just one way, it would be different scenarios. So it's important that with that data and the planning, it's different scenarios, so that there's better agility and to adapt to the different possible scenarios that can, be there. And then the other thing is the element of collaboration. We can never overemphasize that. While we might be on the right track in terms of breaking the silos, but we still have a long way to go. Starting even at government level, and then government, private sector, and community, and just erode the blame game and the finger-pointing exercise. But it's all about, we all have the same, vision, and it's we have the same goal to grow tourism and value proposition thereof, because that it's all about the bottom line. The visitors are the currency, so if there's less visitors because the value proposition is not really perceived or felt to be a viable one, then the economic spin-offs will not be as desirable. And also just when we have disasters, we have that spirit of resilience, in terms of rehabilitating ourselves. If, let's say, post-COVID, now we needed to restructure certain structures and be more adapting to what the future holds, then it's about that, and also just reinvesting to grow our tourism in a much better way. And just lastly, I think my colleague here, Aaron, has just mentioned the element of this knowledge that studies are done by certain entities, but certain entities don't know. So I just think it's a takeaway that maybe through TBSA, there has to be some vehicle or mechanism that when such information, which is imperative for the planning for industry in terms of resilience and growing the tourism, that data is actually shared, and rapid communication, rapid awareness of what is happening and what it means for businesses and how they can adapt in planning for the future. That is what will help in terms of resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, you gave us a lot of new ideas. You've emphasized things that we maybe already know, but that is still important. And just one thing that most of you mentioned is actually collaboration, and that's part of the conferences these 2 days, is to share ideas, to talk to one another, and that's just something that we need to do, I think, more often. So thank you so much this afternoon for your inputs. I really appreciate it. And over to you.
Thank you so much. So a round of applause, please, for our panelists and our moderator.